This one in the end of April, and then another one mid-May, all on the same topic. Oh, yeah. And I'll explain why. This is the core. I mean, we obviously, a lot of people come here because we have great academic reputation. And we want to give your child a top-notch education. This is the place to put them. But at the core of it, they're great character.
Right. Yeah, that's. Yeah. You are Naomi, right? I've met you a couple times, and I was gonna say, you said you don't just doubt yourself.
I know.
What's your name again?
Sadea.
Sadea.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
I'm Daoud.
Daoud, nice to meet
Big
you.
Daoud.
We like Naomi, Mackenzie talks about her a lot.
Oh, Mackenzie.
Yeah.
Yes, she talks about Mackenzie all the time.
Yeah, no, they're fun.
So I was just answering her question. She was wondering, because we advertise this as Aristotelian character education, are you changing something that you're doing? It's a signal we're going to head in another direction. Come on in. Some coffee. And the point is, from the very beginning, what we did with the school is, it was to mold, shape, nurture strong character, using challenging academics as the vehicle to do that. So we had high standards. I've always had high standards. So I think most people do come to the school because of our academic reputation. And I think in terms of academics, we're as good or better than you're going to find it anywhere. But at the core is children, core of the kind of people they're becoming. And I think we found language, better language, more comprehensive language, and more comprehensive approach by using Aristotelian character education, which is in some areas it's becoming I wouldn't say popular, and that's what I want to address today, the unpopularity of it versus trends that are not so productive for children and for young people. But we found it to be a useful vehicle, and I'll explain. Actually, I'm going to use 3 sessions. This one, another one at the end of April, another one at mid-May, and that'll be all video, so you don't necessarily have to come. Although this gives us a chance to do some Q&A. We'll be able to go to close to 9, and then I'll stop after a short period, and probably have a lot of questions. That'll be the most valuable. So. Back up, I don't want to make the sound of Aristotelian character education. Holy smokes, what are we going to get a lecture on Aristotelian Nicomachean ethics? No, you're not going to get that. A lot of it's just common sense, good common sense. And I think probably what Aristotle, in his own way of doing scientific research, discovered, and which his thoughts have sort of permeated history for 2,500 years, is what you probably already want in your children. One, you want them to be fulfilled, whatever capacities they have. If they can go on to get their college degree and their master's degree and their PhD degree, or become a doctor or become a lawyer, you want that for them. And if they couldn't, they don't have those natural capacities, you just want them to be fulfilled, that they would find what Aristotle called you actualized who you are. So you want them to become who they are. And with that, that's what Aristotle called happiness. Now I know we're all parents. I raised 4 kids. I got tons of grandkids. In the back of the mind, I hope they make a lot of money. They're really successful. That part's, you can't get away from that. But I think at its core, that's one piece, is that the self, who they are, could be realized. The word that, or at least the translated word that Aristotle used was to be actualized. The potentialities, whatever potential is in there, would be actualized. So that means to grow. And each stage of your life, you're entering into a higher plane of life. So whether you're 8 or 12 or 16 or 25, you've built up the characteristics. Okay, what do I do now? What can I do now? What are my opportunities now? You're geared toward growing and developing. And then as a part of that, what is your responsibility to your world? So number one, you have a responsibility to yourself. That's at the core of becoming fulfilled, is that someone else is not going to make it happen to you. You have to cultivate the habits and the attitudes that you can say, well, okay, now I'm 16, what can I do? Not, thank God I'm out of this place, I'll never do this stuff again. And I'll address a little bit the trends that we fight against as parents. And I think some of them are more pronounced, and that's one of the reasons I want to have this three talks, is because there's the trends against this outlook of, what can I do now? How do I grow now? How do I serve the people around me? Whether it's my family, I have responsibilities to my family. My mom, my dad, my brothers, my sisters. I have responsibilities when we walk into class, like when I discipline my students. So, of course, sometimes if they're really wild, I'll tell them, stop it, shout at them. But most of the time, that's not so effective. But to talk to them about, okay, what'd you just do to everybody? Everybody came here to study math, what'd you do? You messed it up, didn't you? You owe everybody on how you act, how you behave. So your conduct is both, what can I do to grow? And then what is the best way to bear some responsibility for the world that I live in? Maybe some kids will be influential in history and others not, but that's the outlook you have. And it kind of runs against the theme of just yourself. See, if you just focus on what you can become and your successes, well, you can become a pretty big idiot. It doesn't, I think we know enough of those kind of people, highly successful, and not consider them good people. But at the same time, when they combine those two pieces of being successful themselves, developing the self, and having responsibility to serve people, we owe people. Those two things, I think if I asked as parents, you agree? It's hard to disagree. And it's historical. This is not something that we've made up here. Aristotle, I think, captured the thought better than anyone. You know, that, just for a little bit of history, the period when Aristotle, it was, Socrates, Aristotle, Plato, and the Greeks in general, the philosophy in 400 BCE or 500 BC, around about a 200-year period. Some historians call that an axial period. And you will see similar kind of teachings coming from Buddha.
Axial,
A-X-I-A-L. Axial period. I mean, it changed. You went from your lot in life is just how you got born. So if you're a tradesman, you're a tradesman. You don't talk about going to school and becoming better.
Didn't occur to you.
No, that's a period. So, I'm just giving you some historical context to this. In the Middle East, you had Zoroaster, which again was a rediscovery of what can you become. And same thing with the Jewish prophets. There was a claim to the Jewish prophets of not being caught in your religious setting, and to begin to consider what's happening to the poor, to the needy, to the widow, and so on and so forth, and to become who you can become. So it wasn't just Aristotle. Aristotle and the Greeks kind of gave it context and more maybe deliberate teaching on how to perpetuate it. Plus we're in the West, so I don't know beans about Buddha or Lao Tzu or Zoroaster. It's all little things I picked up. But the axial period is something that's true. And then historically, what Aristotle taught, that has trickled down through history. Whether it's through Augustine and then through Aquinas and then through the Enlightenment period, the core of the Enlightenment period, there is things related to science, the discovery of science, the practice of science, but at the core of the Enlightenment was the discoverment of you, what you can do, what you can become, the self. And that's where a lot of the power of freedom that we see worldwide for the last 500 years is, because the teachings were involved with becoming a free person. You can become something. You're not locked in where you are. And we're not going to go into that, but it'd be interesting if we trace through history how many of the movements worldwide had behind it an opportunity for, I want to be free. I want to be free. That's the natural inclination of a human being. I want to become what I can become. It's just hard to suppress it because it's human nature. And when we talk character education, that's part of what we focus on. You know, our own Constitution, all men are created by God with inalienable rights, among of which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, when Jefferson used the word happiness, he was talking about Aristotelian happiness, which is the happiness of fulfillment, not the happiness of getting to do whatever you want to do. It was the satisfaction. So maybe fulfillment is a better word, or realization of who you become was a better word. But that was the thought, that undergird our country. With my 8th graders, I have a session called the Ben Franklin Initiative. And I don't know how much you know about Ben Franklin, but when he was a teenager, this is why I do it in the 8th grade. When he was a teenager, he decided, I'm gonna be a great person. It's kind of where we get our phrasing up there. And what he did is he identified 13 virtues. And every month he would practice them. From frugality to kindness, he practiced them for a whole month. And every time he practiced one, he'd go on to the next one. He forgot how to practice the original one. He admits that in his autobiography. But the point is how that kind of thought was there, is that you cultivate your characteristics and who you are so that you can become a better and better person. That drive, which is natural. I think this is very important. It's within them. So I have full confidence when I talk to the 8th graders about becoming great people, and it doesn't matter whether it's, you have, a lot of them have dreams about sports, all young people do in America, it doesn't mean beings. Boy, I'll tell you, when you talk to them about what are you going to become, their eyes just go like this. And why is it? It's just not because they're here, it's because they're a human being. And when you talk to people about what you can become and working through things, then it resonates. That's what they like to hear. That's where their sense of fulfillment comes, and that's where the word happiness comes from. So that's that historical context. And then probably in the last 25 years, the use of the word Aristotelian character education has become more popularized. I was just going to show you two books. We're having someone do a workshop with us on Monday, Peter Rea, who works for Parker Hannifin, and he's done work with the military, especially the Navy SEALs and the Army Rangers, teaching them Aristotelian virtues. Now, you would think a Navy SEAL needs to learn Aristotelian virtues. Are you kidding me? No. What they found out is as the soldiers become more virtuous, they become more effective. Then also data is showing that the more virtuous practice by executives at top companies, they become more profitable. And this all runs contrary. You think if somebody's an executive, he works at Parker Hannifin, they have 30,000 employees worldwide. And then he travels, and we'll talk to these organizations, the organizations within the larger Parker Hannifin, and you'd think, first time he told me, he talks to them about virtue, cultivating virtue. I said, Peter, are you out of your mind? These people want to make money. They're not interested in your virtue. It's amazing. The data that they've collected there from the military academies, from the Cleveland Clinic, has a whole program to cultivate human virtue. The productivity goes up, both in the service to people, and what's most important to we Americans is the bottom line, and that's money. Actually, you end up making more money because of the way it's set up. So this fella here, Christian Christensen, I brought these books only in case you're interested. You can't use my books, but you might want to buy one. I'll tell you which ones you'd enjoy and which ones you wouldn't. Christian Christensen, he runs the Jubilee Center in Britain. He was originally from Iceland, and he runs the Jubilee Center. And the whole context is how to use Aristotelian character education in schools and in businesses. And another example is Edith Hall's work, again on Aristotle. It's kind of an re-emergence of, and I think it's a little bit maybe because of our social setting today, or our cultural setting in America, I'm not sure. But in both cases, it is not something out of nowhere. And that's my point I'm making to you as parents and to the video. We didn't invent this stuff. It's given us language that we can use to do those very couple things I mentioned at the beginning. Cultivate who you can become and cultivate your service to others. And I may tire you a little bit of this, but science has verified it. Last 75 years of science has verified, yep, that is the nature of a human being, is they want to develop who they can become. Growth and flourishing. In fact, one writer who is sort of the founder, I think, of what's called positive psychology, Martin Seligman, he calls this the age of the flourishing child. He's a psychologist, recognizing the age of the flourishing child. This one is readable. I'll tell you which ones are readable and which ones are not readable. This one's readable. Of course, probably for you, though, they're all okay. This one, you're going to struggle with this one. This one's very readable. And he says what science has shown is that that's what human beings were made to do, is to flourish, grow. And as soon as you stop growing, there's a spiral downward. Well, and I'll give you time to look at all these. You may be familiar, if you took psychology in college, you've got to know this guy, Abraham Maslow's number. That's the first book you're going to read in your Psychology 101. All right. The top, he has a pyramid of human needs going from basic water, food, shelter, to the top, which is self-actualization. And this, again, is kind of on this level, so I don't know if you'd enjoy reading it or not. But he says that he wrote, this one was put in 2016. He wrote his earlier one back in maybe, 1970s. But his hierarchy of human needs is sort of core to psychology. People branch off, but it's core. And self-actualization, that is becoming who you can become. In fact, he uses the word becoming in this book. He uses the word, most psychology is leading us to understand that people who are becoming are the most healthy psychologically and even physically. This one maybe is readable. He's the same author who wrote Flow, and this is on creativity. And the sightings, Mihail Csikszentmihalyi is the way his name is pronounced. And his findings is that every human being craves newness and innovation and creativity. It's like kind of like when you go shopping. You know, sometimes if you shop too long, you think, what the heck am I doing here? But there's something kind of interesting of looking at new things. And, maybe we need this. Sometimes my wife and I will joke to each other, let's go shopping and find out what we need. And I said, well, I need that. No, you don't. But he cites it. He says, so within us is this drive to be innovative, creative, do something new, become more than we were before. At the same time, we have a drive to keep everything the way it always is. Let's not change. Let's just stay the way we are, because you don't like the discomfort of growing. So the book's about wrestling between those two things. These two psychologists are probably the leaders in their field in some neuroscience, and they're summarizing their finding at the beginning of the book. The brain is wired to set high goals in life. Not philosophy, not some theory, but they conclude the brain is wired to look for opportunities for growth, opportunities to become something more than you currently are. Wired to grow. Probably all familiar with this. Are you? Mindset by Carol Dweck.
Is it the growth versus fixed?
Yeah, growth mindset. Teaching children about the growth mindset. And William Damon, scholar from Stanford on child development, one of the leaders in child development, adolescent development. He wrote Greater Expectations. That's another great book, Greater Expectations. But this one is on the path to purpose. And he's addressing the needs of adolescents who are wandering, lost. And one of the reasons we started the school years ago, among many others, is I worked with young people. It was in religious context. But I found the problem with most kids was not their religious beliefs. The problem was they weren't going anywhere. So teenagers got into trouble because they weren't going anywhere, not because they were bad or naughty or there was too many negative influences. They were not driven from within to cultivate what potentials that they had. And one more, this again is readable. This is by Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lucanus on the coddling of the American mind. This, he addresses what we're calling Aristotelian character education from another distinct aspect of all the things that are happening to children to not cultivate that natural drive to grow and become somebody. So anyway, I'll have all these, and when we stop, you want to write down any of the titles you can.
Make them soft.
All right, why do I do all of that? Is just to show you, we're not imagining this. This is well-rooted in history, and it's well-rooted in science. And we'll talk in a little bit why, because maybe your reaction right now is, how come everybody doesn't do that? Well, there's a lot of good reasons why. Not a lot of good reasons, there's a lot of reasons. And I can address that in a second. How's our time? All right, so what does Aristotelian education do for us? It makes the cultivation of character intentional. Deliberate. It's not an accident. And this is one of the major components of Aristotelian education. We're sort of stuck with our genetics. You can't go back and ask your mom and dad to marry somebody different, or your grandparent. You are stuck with your genetics. You are stuck with the way you got raised. Sometimes it could be really productive and sometimes not. There could be all kinds of factors, or even external factors. You could, like, think about these children in the Ukraine right now. You know, over this period of time, that's going to affect how they look at life, how they approach life. Okay, so Aristotelian character education, and another name is useful in case you're ever interested. Viktor Frankl is another important writer in this. He came out of the Holocaust with a very positive outlook on what he could do with his life, how he could survive the Holocaust and then go on beyond that. Because no matter your circumstances, you can grow virtue. And Aristotle listed them. We've got them all up there, at least the ones we use. There's many more than that. You can cultivate that. You can cultivate courage. You can cultivate self-discipline. You can cultivate compassion. You can cultivate justice. You can cultivate gratitude. You can cultivate humanity. You can cultivate wisdom. And when there's the awareness that it can be grown, it can be nurtured, it can be made stronger year after year, then gradually you, of course, now you have little children, so you have, I don't know, 90% of control, 95, kind of depends how wild your little ones are, how much you control, but most of it, you're shaping them. And I'll talk about this in a second with habits and character, but you're shaping them. But what you really want is when they hit their adolescent years, it's in them. It's in them. These virtues, and to Aristotle, the word virtue is from the Greek word arete. And arete, maybe I'm not pronouncing it right, arete meant excellencies. In other words, you practice these things, it creates excellence. Yeah, beautiful, something beautiful. And you know this when you know people you respect in your life. They live in a certain way. Maybe they're highly successful in their field, maybe not, but you just think, that is just a beautiful person. That is a wonderful person. You recognize it because it's excellent. And so with Aristotle, and this is what we do here at Birchwood, is we identify these. And then understanding they can be cultivated, they can be grown, so that they become habits. And this is the thing with Aristotle. So no matter who the kids are, you just don't care. They can be taught, and they can be grown, shaped, molded when they're little, and then gradually given that enough habits that this is the way that they live. So to Aristotle and to many philosophers after that, William James being one that was big on habits, that we are ultimately all the habits that we have built up. That's who we are. And 80% of your habits are shaped by the time you're 15 years old. Now after that, things happen and we change, but most of them are shaped in that period of time up to your 15 years old. So now we got little kids, unlimited what we can do with them. Now we're gonna fight with their genetics too, and with their background too. That all fits into it. But the hope this generates, I can work with my child a lot and create that kind of attitude toward life, and that attitude toward serving other people. And how do we do it? By the cultivation of these virtues to make them habits. That was the main thought. And gradually, the accumulation of habits becomes who you are. So not so much what we say or what we do, but follow me around long enough, if you could, you'd know who I was without my saying a word. Oh, I know who he is. Because that's who I am, with your character, and with any character. And so that's the thought in Aristotelian character education, is we can shape that through, in subsequent, two subsequent meetings that I'll have, I'll go in much detail. How do you take these things and make them real to children? But basically there's three components. One, you have to teach them. Teach through stories. You see and hear stories of fabulous people. And it just awakened. Oh man, I want to be like that. Oh, I want to be like that. I take award-winning movies with my 8th grade students and we watch them all year. And when the movie's over, we talk about the characters. Like we just finished the biography of Jackie Robinson a while back. And then when it's all over, we talk, okay, what are all the things that told Jackie you can't make it? Let's talk about them. And then let's talk about how he faced one by one, he faced them down. How many of you would have given up? And they would all say, well, yeah, me too, I've given up. Things that he faced, he made it through. But their heart is awakened to goodness, is awakened to virtue. And they see the beautiful things. In January, we watched The Elephant Man. Have you ever watched The Elephant Man? Oh, what a great story. This, I don't want to summarize the story, but we talked about the compassion of the doctors who were around the Elephant Man and their belief in him, and gradually what was inside of him came out. They found out this terribly deformed human being was actually quite a beautiful human being inwardly. And they discovered it through their compassion, their kindness to him, and gradually understanding his story. So the first thing in character education is to inspire the heart. That's why every morning we're reading biographies to children, we're telling them stories, great events, so your heart gets inspired. You can't teach this stuff like you can your tables of 7. Tables of 7, I'll work with you long enough, you got to memorize. You don't teach this stuff that way. It's just more like osmosis. We call it the drip, drip, drip of character education. You hear it again, then you hear it again, then you hear it again. And most things that are true are like that. We forget things that are true, remember the things that are negative. So even they watch these movies, you almost know how they're going to turn out. We watched, I don't know if you saw, anybody have ever watched Glory Road? It's the story of the first all African American basketball team. Texas Western won the national championship. Nobody, at first people didn't want to play them because you had all African Americans on that team, and they just struggled and struggled and struggled. And you just, when they win the championship at the end, the whole classroom, yeah, they're around. Shh, this class is going on. But it inspires their heart. And it begins to make them think. This is how we learn to live our life, is we hear stories. And then we incorporate those stories into our own story, and then that becomes how we live. The second thing you do is you have to train. See, these are habits. So for all of these characteristics, there's things to do, we do with the children to make them practice it. Probably you all lament homework, I'm sure. Few parents understand, in our view, I look at it 8 years. So if kids don't turn in their homework here, I really don't care. But we're going to be consistent. And you're going to learn, like, come home, I have to manage my time, I have to be organized. You do that for 8 years, that's one of our better characteristics we've built in the kids. They are like tigers when they go to high school. Over and over again, high school teachers say, what do you do? What do you do? Well, it starts in the first grade, and then I have to listen to 8 years of complaints about the homework policy. And when they graduate from the 8th grade, parents all tell me, "Oh, I'm so glad what you did for my kid." Yeah, thanks. Will you please apologize for all the times you complained to me? But that's what it takes. And it's the same thing. In another session, we'll go over each of the virtues, and then how you turn them into something that children practice. So you can't just yell at them. Tell them you have to be nice, don't be mean. There's a whole, what Aristotle called a phronesis. Your whole thought goes behind each one of these virtues. And by that thought, that's what we teach, and that's what we train. So like I mentioned to you about disobedience in the classroom, on the one hand, I can be very strict, and probably when I was younger, that's the way I ran my show. Just very strict, and eventually I found out, no, they need to understand. If they're going to control themselves all the time, then they need to begin to understand, when I shout out, that affects her. When I shout out, that affects the class. Because the reasoning will be much more powerful than a strict teacher yelling at them. Because you can notice what happens, you would know what happens when a strict teacher leaves the classroom. They all go back to their original behaviors, because they don't own it. So that's the second feature, is the training. You have teaching, you have training, and then the third feature is culture, which you all have in your homes already. And that's why you all already have pretty darn good kids, because they mimic you. That's the first line of learning behavior, is they mimic mom and dad, for better or for worse, no offense. I always like that. I heard from one teacher, I read something at a conference, the teacher said, "I won't tell you what your daughter says about you and believe it, or if you don't believe what your daughter says about me." Yeah. In other words, we're frail, we're human beings, we have weaknesses. Nevertheless, it is our effort, and I talk to the teachers about this all the time, it's our effort to become a better person. According to this, to be a reflective person, to be a thoughtful person on how to grow, that has this invisible impact on the kids. Just like your impact, how many things they will pick up from you, and you say, "How did you learn that? That's just the way I do it." Well, there's just this kind of osmosis in the culture, but the culture represented by the adults in their life. So that's a big part. So when I talk about Aristotelian character education, like we're having two of our half-day sessions, this one on Monday and another one in April, it's all about, well, let's not talk about what we're going to say to the kids. Let's talk about your pathway. And then I have ways to work with the staff, not to tell them how to behave, this isn't that kind of thing, but to reflect on your life and to consider becoming a better and better person, with the virtues, because they define the characteristics that make us a better person, and they give us a pathway to become a better person. And by living under some call, let's just say this is a call, and maybe I'll cut in here for a second. We chose Aristotelian character education because it has no religious implications. This is secular, entirely secular. It's based on what we know about science and what we know about history. You still have your religious backgrounds, and that will also include callings to how to behave yourself. We found in a secular environment, that's why we can have people from India, people from China, a very diverse population. Catholic, Protestant, evangelical, Muslim, all different backgrounds. Everybody says, "Yeah, I like that. I'm Hindu, but I like that. I'm Greek Orthodox, but I like that," because it fits our natural inclinations of what we know to be true. So let me just add one more thing. The reason why I feel very strongly to dig my heels in for this is because it's historical roots, it's science roots, and today I do not envy you raising children in this environment. There are so many trends that teach otherwise. Making children a victim of their circumstances. In other words, in order to help your child, you change the environment. Instead of that environment, how about we work together, son? Let's help you be better. So the emphasis on this is training the children to make the most of their life, not removing things that will keep them from growing. Because there's no end to that. Have you ever tried to make your children happy with taking them places, you know, you take them to Cedar Point, and even before the day is done, are we gonna go to Disney World soon, Mom? Honey, we just went to Cedar Point, now what? Because there's no end to that. Or it's the same thing with the social media and all. No matter how many games they play or whatever you allow them to do, you always want more. I think there's a word for that. Hedonic adaptation. Hedonism, and you adapt to it. Keep adapting to it. All right, so I'll stop there, and then get some coffee if you want, some donuts, and then we can talk some more. In the next 2 sessions, I'll go in detail about how do you translate these things into things you can help your children practice, and the practice then hopefully becomes habits.
I have a question on
Yeah.
self-actualization. We've read several books with our children at home regarding self-actualization. And the ones that we've read, I can't even tell you the titles because my husband's a reader, has taught the kids that you really don't become self-actualized until you're almost towards your end of life.
Yes, and that was Aristotle's point.
Okay,
Mhm.
that's, because I go home now and tell my kids, they're like, wait a minute. Okay.
Okay, all right, so this is
can you
a,
further explain that?
this is a trailer for the next one.
Okay.
What you're doing now with us is you're teaching the process of growing. This incremental growing. It's your life's habit to grow. So to Aristotle, he says you never know whether you've led a good life until the end.
Okay.
And then you
That's what
reflect
we're
on it.
talking
But this whole Aristotelian thing is not an absolute thing. Like you're not compassionate. No, it's always a process. So to become self-actualized is growth upon growth upon growth upon growth. Every year, what are you gonna? You have some kids in your class who are sort of outsiders. How could you help them be a part of the class, Gus? It's just a little thing. That's not self-actualization, but that's in the process of discovering who they are. He may discover, wow, I got away with kids, I'm a leader. I'm gonna use that. So that may be a year down the road or 5 years down the road. But if he doesn't practice learning how to be just and compassionate, he may never find that characteristic. But that is only a part of the whole self-actualization process. So you're always growing and you're never there, I guess.
Right.
And if you were, then what's the purpose of life? You think you're fulfilled, you think you're done, well, just die then, because, you know what I mean? You're not growing every single day with every single situation. You can't ever be done.
Matrix.
Yeah, you can't ever be at capacity,
Yeah.
right?
Is there be an aspect or a part of focus to, not arming them, but giving them that defense to push back against forces that would say you're like the coddling, or like what because we live in a world where like Keanu Reeves or what I said, I don't want to live in a world where kindness is a weakness, and there's a benefit to all these things. Like is there a focus on giving them all of these things and being able to make them explain it to others who don't agree with their faith? Like this rugged individualism of you're the only thing that matters, and as long as it's not affecting you, just like some of this very insensitive. Like if you're sensitive and you're kind, it's a weakness, but we know, like you keep saying, we've proven the benefits. Science, are they going to be sort of able to explain like the practical realities? So somebody says, well, that's not going to make money, sweetie. Because it's how are they going to be able to say, well, yes, it is, because I come from progressive, where 20 years ago, I've been here 20 years, and like 10 years ago, even they were saying like it's a business need to be inclusive, and it makes you make more money when you can sell to more people and all these things. And so it's on me being able to say, well, this is why progressive's so cushy and nice, is because we want to make money and it makes sense. Is there an aspect to that to be able to explain to people who don't follow these things?
Yeah, eventually, but it's all a process. And you can only explain, if we had time today, I could ask every one of you to explain things you really know. And because you can explain it easily. If you don't know it, you kind of fumble with the language and you fumble with examples because you don't know it. So this kind of development of character is a process.
To champion this
Yeah,
process.
and as it's a process, there's going to be tons of failure. So, you just hang on for the teen years. You've done so much, you've worked so hard, you sent them to a good school, and then they hooked up with the wrong crowd. What on earth, and then they got in trouble. My kid, my good kid, got in trouble. Yeah, well, just count on it. Because this becoming a better and better person is not an absolute. And sometimes we parents make that mistake. Whether we think about academics for the children or behavior for the children, we think in terms of absolutes. And maybe in the back of our mind, but I don't think you could hold yourself up to the standard of an absolute. But and that's why growth is important, because if you're growing, you know how much you screw up. And that makes you very sensitive to when your little boy or little girl messes up. Because you're sensitive. You say, well, okay, let's look at it again. You made a mistake, right? All right, well, let's look at it. You haven't done your homework in 3 weeks. Well, honey, that's not good. Let's talk about how we face that. So the process involves loving parents, at a lesser degree, concerned teachers, who walk them through becoming better, accepting where you're off, but at the same time, pointing the direction positively. Learning to be comfortable with mistakes is a big, big, big part of it, which doesn't seem like it. I think traditionally you talk about character, you're talking about absolutes, and then you hide. People would hide from where they're weak, as opposed to saying, well, I'm not that, but I can make progress in this, a little bit of progress. And that way your sense of equanimity, your sense of peace can stay. You're not embarrassed because you can't do certain things. You're not frustrated. But you always say, no, everything can make some progress in it. And that's what the kids need to learn. And I have 4 kids. They're all grown now. Before they went to high school, I knew the kind of things they were going to face. So we would rehearse what's going to happen when you go to a party on a Friday night after the football game. You know what's going to happen? How do they cope with it? You could take them out of everything. It won't work. You'll make them mad at you. So how do you help them walk through that? So you're their partner. That's probably the biggest role parents will play, and then teachers as well, is you partner with them. So when I have children who screw up in my math class or not developing the characteristics, okay, on one hand, sometimes when I lose my temper, I yell at them. Then when I calm down, I say, okay, come and see me during your study hall, and then we talk about it. Okay, what's happening? Something going on at home? Not able to schedule? Well, I got a new video game, and it's okay. Well, let's talk about how you can still play your video game and get all your homework done. That's possible. So you coach them through that. They don't know how to go through that. So it's your maturity that coaches them.
You'll speak for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I love seeing it at such a young level. I have a first grader. And just last night, I put them to bed, we read, we're all in bed, lights out, and he wanted to get water. And I said, well, go ahead and go get yourself a cup of water. And he said, will you please come with me? And I said, no, baby, just go. Well, he was afraid of the dark. So he said to me, okay, I'm gonna have courage, I'm gonna take a deep breath, and believe in myself. I know that there's nothing in our house. And I heard him.
Does he want to be the head of school here?
I heard him thinking and saying exactly what he's learning from all of this. And I was like, yeah, baby, go do that. And I realized that it is impacting him. And he's using,
The verbiage.
the verbiage. And he's taking a deep breath. And he's turning on the light. And, oh, okay, I'm fine. And I believe in myself and all these things.
And you're still young enough not to feel cheesy about it. Older
I
kids
know.
are like,
An older child, yeah. But I just thought
So
that
cute.
was really sweet and powerful to see it in a 6, 7-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
For something so simple as
Yeah.
being afraid.
And I think when they're that old, you have to draw the distinction between them mimicking what they took and their actual behavior.
Mm-hmm.
That's important, because when they're little, they can mimic it.
Yeah.
Now this time, he mimicked it and he did it.
Mhm.
But a lot of times they can mimic it and they're not there. And so having the mercy to say, well, that's good, okay, you said the right thing, and next time, let's look at it like this.
I think it's good. If I can add to, I think it's good when it's happening on both ends.
Oh,
When
yeah.
It's happening at home and when it's happening in the school. You know that they're, firing and wiring those cells on all platforms. And I love that story. we've had a ton of them, but with my son, he's coming into, you know, more of a knowing of or actualization of himself, and you can see the growth. So it's good to know a lot of the, I didn't know you guys were teaching all those principles here, but I've been working with him on those principles at home for some time. I even got wristbands and stuff that say I forgive myself, I love myself, I believe in myself, and I teach in, you know, I work in multiple schools throughout the city. So it's good to know that that same type of work is being done in the classroom now. That's awesome.
Yeah. If you were to look at textbooks of 100, 150 years ago, character was a part of the whole thing. Maybe too much so, but it was a very big role for schools to play. And I don't think that's necessarily the case anymore most of the time. For multiple reasons, which I don't think it's necessarily advantageous to go into them, otherwise it looks like just griping or something. So I like to stay with the positive perspective.
But it's true, we're truly fighting a battle against
Yeah.
the world, right? Let's just hold on to these virtues. It just feels like it's getting more difficult every year.
Yeah.
You know, us against the world, I just feel like that, and it's sad, but it's also refreshing that there are still communities of people who think this is important.
Yeah.
Before a certain generation, there were anything called trolls, or people who purposely make it part of their life to cause discord and problems, and
Right.
It's a pastime. It's a pastime for some segment of the population to create mischief and problems for other people for fun, you know. And so there's a new part of that, the aspect that I think that my parents didn't go through. Like, they knew what I was gonna. They knew somebody was gonna, try to sex, drugs, and rock and roll, but now I'm not quite sure what someone's gonna show her. I'm really not sure, really. I don't really know how to have those preemptive conversations always, because I'm not sure what somebody's gonna put up in front of her quite yet. It's some stuff I would never.
Yeah. And that's why it's better to focus on the positive.
Right.
And they'll learn how to deal with the negative. You know who had it real hard are immigrants, first generation of immigrants. When I was much younger, I worked with the Chinese community, Korean community. I lived in Korea for a few years with my wife. And here's the problem: that back in the 70s, when with the immigrants who came from either China or from Korea, is you came from a monolithic culture. You just let your kids go out, and they're gonna get, if they do anything bad, someone in the neighborhood's gonna say, you don't do that. And education meant the same thing to everybody. How you behave as a Korean meant the same thing to everybody. Now you come to America, and there's all kinds of ways to live your life. So they ran into that problem. They didn't know when. Their kids would always come back to them and say, well, my other friends don't have to study this much. They get to do this, they get to do that. How come you're so strict, Mommy? How come you won't let me do things? And that, a little bit, that goes to your point. One day they're gonna say, Mommy, everybody else is doing it. And you say, okay, now how do I answer that? I mean, I eventually borrowed from what the Jewish community does with their kids. I always thought it was amazing that they can maintain their Jewish culture and their Jewishness through the history they've gone through. How did you do that? They're just insistent, we're Jews. Of course we're not gonna do that, we're Jews. Well, I'm not saying that absolute, but I like that attitude. Okay, so the world's headed in that direction, but we're Debelaks. That was the phrase I used with my kids. I don't care what they're doing, we're Debelak, we're Dawods. I really don't care, honey. This is what we do. And I think it's a little bit different, of course, for us, but I think there's a pride. Children like to know, I'm special. And the specialness to us is you're part of our family. That's what makes you special. We can't say American because it means so many different things, but to cherish, well, that's who we are, and how we live, how we want to be good people, that's what we hold on to. So I know other people believe other things, and that's okay. You let them, but this is who we are.
I think I love I'll have to read a little bit more, but I love obviously the virtues and everything. To me, really, for me, what that is spirituality. It's my faith, and that's how I inculcate in my daughter, right? These specific virtues. But I think what you said is really important, because when you're able, I think the school has a more challenging time to it, because you don't have that element of faith, right? Because what you're bridging to is identity. I'm not just compassionate, I'm not showing compassion, I am compassionate because this is who I am. Whether I'm Christian, I am the daughter of such and such. So I think it's an extension of, one thing is to do the act, the other thing is because that's part of who I am, that's part of my identity. And I think that that's kind of also the beautiful thing, that when you do have faith, you can kind of bring all this together in that, right? Some of what you're saying, I think about biblically, do not, let those of the world become like you, don't become like them, right? Those are some of the things that are already within scripture that you can pull from, but that similarly, so I'm excited to see that you have it here, and I'm glad to see that at home, we're able to support each other. I think my only point is that I think that for us, we do a lot of that through our faith structure.
Absolutely. I think if we could go back 70, 80 years, most of this, not all, but most of it's done at home and in the church or synagogue or temple.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it was culcated. The problem we're facing today is, if it's not done here, or if it's not done in the family, where else is it done?
No, right.
Sometimes I joke with the teachers that character development is a little bit like going to church every Sunday. Okay, you go to church every Sunday and the pastor says, we have to love one another. And you're sitting there in the pew thinking, that's right, I forgot all about that. That's the way truth works. You do the bad things easily, but the good things, it's like you get reminded that you're supposed to love one another and you're supposed to be kind to one another. And so it gets refreshed. So if it's not being refreshed, either at home or at church or something like that, I think the responsibility is bigger on parents than it was 70 years ago, because they're not getting it from another source, unless you do have a faith of some sort that you do.
How do you go about teaching balance amongst the virtues? Meaning that, Benjamin Franklin, I don't think he departed from all of them, but he still got kicked out of France because he lost sight of some of them. Meaning that, with a bunch of different virtues, ultimately you're going to have to make choices amongst them. Pursuit of the good life, eudaimonia, whatever you want to call it. How do you choose? Are you able to do that by the time somebody leaves 8th grade, or is this one of those things that that's more of a life journey that happens after?
I would say the latter. Like when I talk about wisdom, I don't really quite know how to talk to children about wisdom, because wisdom seems to be a history of what you know to be true, your mess ups. And so to navigate compassion, justice, you have some adequate experience and adequate knowledge that for that circumstance, you can make a smart move. Or what I call, the only thing, when I talk to adults about wisdom, when you make a decision, it just creates peace. Peace in your own heart, peace with other people. And I don't think you can do that without lots and lots of experience. So by the end of the 8th grade, man, if I could do that, that'd be a miracle. That would restore my faith. I don't know if you can. I think you have to go through life practicing. But one of the things I talk to the teachers about is, because they'll say, well, which one should I focus on? Which virtue should I focus on? And I just tell them, you have to read the script of your life. Somehow your life seems to teach you. You're arguing with somebody in your office and you can't stand them and they can't stand you. I call that the script of your life. Okay, well, yeah, maybe they are a jerk, but you can't get along with them? Nobody can? They would have got fired if nobody can. So how? How do you? So it's your life that tells you what to address, and then those experiences accumulate. So you've worked with people you had to swallow deeply to communicate with, people who were generous in collaborating with you. Those experiences accumulate to, I think, a discernment of what's appropriate at what time. Justice is a big one, for example, today, what people call social justice. Wow, it's all over the place. Well, one person calls justice, another person calls hate. You think, how on earth does it come like that? Well, I think some of it, at least, is a lack of experience of having this as your practice. So you practice being virtuous, and then there's some learning involved. So that's a long explanation. I don't know if you can distinguish between them, other than what your experience has taught them. I wish some of our politicians had a lifelong exercise of exercising these,
Exercise, okay.
so there'd be wisdom. You can't tell me the people, our people, this is what I'm always amazed at. I get to know people and I say, what a nice guy, and then I find out, you're that political party? Are you kidding me? How could you, but that's a lack, that's a lack of getting to know people who are different, and you haven't practiced compassion, you haven't practiced storytelling, you haven't practiced justice.
What he said about the teaching about at the higher levels though, will they ever be given examples where two of them conflict, where somebody says, to put the compassion of someone who's a victim who needs this medical treatment, but the justice of what you feel is right for, what are they ever gonna be like, having, when people use these things?
I don't know, I trust people, I really do trust people. I trust people if you have an exercise to become a better and better person. You'll tell yourself your own story that you'll justify or be condemned by, one or the other. And it's just, children may be a little less, it's a little more black and white with all our kids. And when in our next session, we'll talk about that. But as they get into their teen years, they're gonna have to be their own person. And they're gonna have to be driven by their experiences of what's right and wrong. But if they've not been practiced in it, then they don't have a plumb line for what's right and what's wrong. That's why I like the movies that we watch, because to some kids are from a background, they only know one kind of people. Well, it's good to look at a whole different set of people, what they went through, and oh my goodness, it's not that simple.
Yeah, and the Dr. Otis who came
Yeah.
a couple of months ago, what a powerful message.
Yeah.
And I was in the back bawling my eyes out like a baby. I was so embarrassed.
I got there too.
Wasn't it?
Yeah,
It was so beautiful.
The story behind everything was just like, wow.
Yeah, but for all our kids to be exposed to that,
Exactly.
I'm
yeah.
like crying thinking about it right now. Sorry, very emotional.
Yeah.
But thank you for exposing our children to those stories.
If I could add something, I had a conversation with a panel of husbands recently, and we're talking about balance in marriage, and what we end up coming to somewhat of a conclusion on that there is none, right? There's no like work-life balance. It doesn't exist. So what you strive for is harmony, right? You strive to learn to, the way I word it, is dance with the different circumstances and challenges and things that you face throughout life. Because when you think harmony or rhythm or beat, it's more of a movement, right? So even in a situation like you said, what happens when they have this one and they have to weigh the two, it's more of a harmonized. Like when I watch my daughter, she's like, Daddy, this color and this color makes this color. But there's never an equal amount that she draws with each crayon, right? It might be this one she draws for a second, but this one she's like going hardcore on it. She's like, look, it's purple now. And but if I was hardcore, I'd be like, but you didn't do an equal amount of each, so it's not balanced. But if I allow her to just do it on her own, it still looks like the same color, but she had her own blend of it with her own amount of like this what felt right. So I think that's what we'll learn more throughout this process, is that it's not a balance necessarily of it, but you'll kind of find a harmony of what fits in the moment, and you'll dance with that scenario.
Yeah. Like, you're supposed to love your wife, right? So someone says, oh yeah, then you take your chocolates. You take your chocolates and you didn't know your wife was on a diet. So that's what you think of me, huh? So much for your exercise of love.
Exactly.
Well, it's 9, so we should stop. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
So we'll do the next one.